Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm doing my September wrap-up. Now let me get out my notepad here. I have a notepad now. I feel like I am conducting an interview. So I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I read 12 books in September. And I had 3 DNFs. I really didn't have the best reading month. I've been in like a shitty headspace, mental health space. A lot of these books ended up just being meh for me, like I do have a reading vlog where I read 5 of these, and it's a creepy child reading vlog, so I will leave that linked up above and down below in case you're curious to hear like my full thoughts on some of these, because I'm not going to get into like full-blown thoughts on those books, but I'll give you a brief synopsis. If you are new here, I always start with the books that I like the least, and then I work my way up to the books that I like the most. He's running the vacuum cleaner. So I'm going to start with my 3 DNFs. The first one being Baby Teeth. This fucking book, oh my god, specifically the audiobook, it is so bad, so bad. I think I DNF'd at 40%. I was gonna try to read this for the creepy child vlog. If you saw that video, I just couldn't push on anymore. It was just so bad. Nothing was happening other than this child was evil, and it was just so repetitive, and the audiobook was so bad because this woman was trying to do like a Swedish accent as the father, and it sounded like an 85-year-old woman. At one point, I think it actually took me until about 30% in where I realized that that was supposed to be the father and not like a grandmother. It was so bad. I just couldn't. I just couldn't. The next DNF was Notes of an Execution, Notes on an Execution, whatever, it's up here. I tried to start the audiobook. We're just gonna wait a second. Drinking kombucha, I'm like craving soda. I don't drink soda. I don't know why. So I found this old kombucha in the back of my fridge from like 4 months ago. I don't know, it's kind of doing the trick though. But kombucha also makes me sick, so... Anyways, where were we? Notes on a fucking Execution. This book, I don't have too much to say about it other than I just thought it was boring. So we're basically following this story of a man who is on death row for like murdering a bunch of women. And you're following the story, first of all, from like his point of view, but it's second person. So it's like you are the serial killer, you are the man on death row. So it's like you, which fucking annoys me. And then we're also following like stories from like the women that he's impacted during his like life, I guess, during his killing sprees. So yeah, it just focuses on these different women throughout his life and their story. And I don't know if it was the actual book. I don't know if it was the audiobook. I just thought it was boring and I just couldn't get into it. I was trying to listen to it while I was working. Maybe that's the issue. I don't know, but I just couldn't get into it. Had to DNF. I think I DNF'd at like also 40%. And then my last DNF was The Island by Adrienne McKinty. I know a lot of people love this thriller. A lot of people are like obsessed and say it's like one of their favorite thrillers of this year. I got the audiobook and people are saying the audiobook is so good and that they highly recommend the audio because it has gunshot sounds and it has wind sounds. This audiobook, the woman narrating, she was trying to do like, first of all, an American accent, then she was trying to do an Australian accent, and she was trying to do like all these different Australian accents and English accents, and it was just, and it was so bad too, like so poorly done. And it went from like an Australian accent to like an English, she sounded like an English queen, and then it went from that into, she sounded I don't even know, like Scottish, and then she sounded Irish. It was just so bad that I just could not continue listening to this any longer, and I had to DNF. I don't know, I might like the book more if I try to read it physically in the future, but everyone's recommending the audiobook. I cannot for the life of me concentrate on that audiobook. I think it is so poorly done. Next, I had two-star reads, one being The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. This is my least favorite book that I read this month that I finished. And this book, you guys, I know a lot of people love Lucinda Berry. I was not about it. It's just about this couple who they end up adopting this child that is was like badly abused and stuff, and they bring her in and she's acting up towards the mom, and the dad doesn't believe them, and you're trying to figure out like what's going on with this child. Me personally, you know, I read this one for a vlog, so if you want to hear full thoughts, go check it out, because I really went into depth with this one and why I don't like it. But for me, I'm just not a huge fan of Lucinda Berry's writing. I just think it's so like slow and clinical, where it's like you can tell that she's a psychiatrist, and I don't know. I don't really care. Like, I find them to just be like so, I don't know. Look, I feel like because she always tries to like make each book about like a different like diagnosis, like mental health diagnosis, or I don't know. I just am not interested. I don't know what it is. It's just something about the writing that I find boring. And this book, literally nothing happened the entire book until like the end of the book. And it's like, surprise! And then like all this craziness happens at the end, and then there's no ending. It just like abruptly ends. And I fucking hated it. I really don't understand the hype with this one. I mean, to each their own. I'm glad if you loved it, I'm glad you loved it, but it was just not for me. Then my next two-star read was The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. Now, I have never read a Christopher Pike book growing up. I didn't read anything growing up except for Goosebumps and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Okay, that was it. I never read Christopher Pike, so I didn't know what to expect going in, but since The Midnight Club is going to be a show coming out on Netflix on October 7th, I really wanted to read the book first to see like kind of what the show was gonna give me, you know? And to me, like the previews of the show looked like, you know, horror, YA horror. It's the same writers as The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor and all those shows. And I was like super excited, right? And then reading the back of this book, it sounded like YA horror. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna give it a shot. And basically we're following this group of teenagers who are in a hospice home because they are all dying of some form of cancer. And basically they start this midnight club where every night at midnight they all get together and tell each other like stories. They can be scary, they can be not scary, whatever. And then one night, one of them has an idea where whichever one of them dies first, they have to basically give them some sort of sign that there is an afterlife, or give them a sign as to like what happens when you die. And so I was like, okay, there has to be some sort of like spooky paranormal element to this, but it was literally like reading The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Which, like, listen, no disrespect, I was a John Green slut growing up. That's like literally all I read as a teen. I was obsessed with reading John Green, so like no disrespect to Mr. Green, you know? But this book it read more like YA romance slash drama. Like, it wasn't giving me any horror vibes, like, in the slightest. And the stories, first of all, you read these stories that they're telling each other in their midnight club, and the stories just go on and on and on and on and on, and it's always some like stupid story, like ancient Egyptian past lives and different stories that like I just did not care about. So I actually ended up like skimming through a lot of the stories because I wanted to know like what was happening with the plot, and then turns out nothing was happening with the plot. So I mean, maybe if I was a child reading this, I would have liked it because it's literally a children's book. But as an almost 30-year-old adult, can't relate. Next, my 2.5 was Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which I also read for my vlog. And this one is just about this boy who he basically sees this figure, man, face in the clouds, and it makes him go into the woods for like a week. He disappears in the woods and he comes out of the woods and he's alive and everyone's all excited. And he was like, oh, the nice man helped me out of the woods. And everyone's like, who the fuck is this nice man? Then he's like, oh, the nice man led me back into the woods and told me to build a tree house. So he has this imaginary friend in the woods in his tree house. And he's fucking creepy. The first half of this book, not even the first half, the first like 200 pages, obsessed, loved it. I was like, oh, this is really gonna give me those like creepy kid vibes that I love in, you know, books and movies and stuff. And the problem is that this book is 700 fucking pages and it was just dragging so much. It was so boring. Once like that halfway mark hit, I actually DNF'd this at like page 550. Yeah, technically is a DNF, but I'm counting it as I read it because I just could not continue anymore. I Googled the ending and it has this weird religious ending to it, which apparently a lot of people are pissed off about. I thought it was okay because it made sense. Like everything that happened, like made sense, but just not my favorite ending and just not my favorite book. I had high hopes for this going in because the beginning was like so good to me and it just got worse and worse as it went. So I sadly can't recommend this one. Next, I have two 3-star books. The first one being Ghost Eaters, and this is a new book that just came out in September. I had an arc on NetGalley, and this one ended up being okay for me. So we're basically following this guy named Silas, and he is addicted to drugs, and he basically overdoses and dies, and our main character, Erin, is his friend slash like on again off again ex-girlfriend, and she is obsessed with him and he passes away. Obviously she's very devastated and she gets together with her friends who were also friends with him. They were in this little friend group, and the one friend is basically like, oh, by the way, Silas discovered this new drug before he passed away called Ghost, where if you take the drug you see people who have passed away, like you see ghosts, right? So they all decide to do this seance and take this ghost drug in order to see Silas again and kind of bring him back. So they do the seance, and that's where I will leave things. This book did a really great job at exploring kind of what it's like struggling with addiction. It had a lot of meaning behind a lot of the things that were going on. It had a lot of creepy scenes that I really enjoyed, but overall there were just, I don't know, certain aspects of this book didn't like fully 100% make sense to me, even though like a lot of it was explained, but sometimes I'm just kind of like, okay, but why? Like I wanted a little bit more of an explanation sometimes, and so pieces of it kind of became confusing to me, and also it kind of just ended up being like a lot of times the same thing was kind of happening over and over and over again. It's like something would happen and then the main character would just make a stupid decision for the sake of like the plot continuing, you know what I mean? And then it's like the same thing happens again, and it was kind of just this like cycle where I kind of got bored off and on. Like I would get really bored and then I would get excited again and then I would get really bored. So it ended up just being like an average 3-star for me. It was okay, like I would recommend it, but it just wasn't a favorite. Next is going to be my unpopular opinion of this video, so I need to take a little drink here. Oh man. Are you ready for this one? It's Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I'm settling on a 3-star for this guy. Going into this, I thought this would be a 5-star book, much like everyone else. Everyone I have seen giving this 5 stars. Everyone's obsessed. I feel like that's every Stephen King book that comes out, but let me tell you something. Stephen King is so hit or miss for me. I am not a huge fan of his writing because I feel like he rambles way too much. There's way too much fluff. And when I saw that this book was 600 pages, I was like, here we go. It's another one, and it's another one. So basically, if you don't already know, we are following this 17-year-old boy named Charlie, and he basically one day hears this dog barking and he hears a man screaming, and he goes to see what's going on, and it's this man named Mr. Bowditch. I just read this entire book and don't remember his name. But yeah, he discovers Mr. Bowditch. Am I saying that properly? Bowditch. So he discovers Mr. Bowditch. Why can't I say this fucking man's name? Okay, so he discovers him, and he is like this old crabby man in the neighborhood, and he goes over there to help him out, and anyways, they end up becoming friends. He ends up helping him out. Turns out there's a portal in his shed to a whole other world. That's the gist of this book. So it is a fantasy book, and the first 200 pages is such amazingly strong character development. I was obsessed. I was like, oh, this is for sure like a 5-star read. But then once we started dipping into the fantasy element, I kind of just lost my interest. I'm not a fantasy reader. This, quite honestly, is not the type of book that I enjoy, and it's just not for me. And, you know, it ended up doing the typical Stephen King for me, where I felt like there was just too much fluff kind of going on. And what happened is there was such strong character development in the beginning, but to me, in my opinion, once we got into the fantasy world where like there should have been a lot of character development, I felt like there were just so many characters kind of just thrown in there with names being thrown around, and I kind of lost what was going on. I read this physically as well as listened to the audio. It took me all month to finish, so it wasn't like I rushed through it or anything, and I was kind of just losing track of who was who. He actually makes jokes about it, like here and there in the book, like, sorry I'm throwing all these names out at you, and I'm like, okay, but then why are you doing it? Because I felt like there wasn't enough character development because there were so many characters that I didn't care about any of them, and then I therefore didn't care about the book because I no longer cared about the characters. Not to mention Charlie, our main character, who's supposed to be 17, suddenly started talking and acting like a 50-year-old man. It was just very all over the place. I know a lot of people will probably disagree with me. I'm expecting that. It's fine. I'm glad a lot of people loved this book, and sadly, I just don't think it was for me. It wasn't a bad book. I still recommend it, but like I'm saying, like, this is not something that I would typically read. I did really love the ending. Obviously, I'm obsessed with the dog Radar. I would honestly take a bullet for Radar, but if Radar wasn't in this book, I don't know if I would give this anything more than like a 2 or a 2.5, if I'm being completely honest. I don't know about this one. It wasn't, I don't know. Please let me know if you read this book, what you think in the comments down below. I feel like every time a new Stephen King book comes out, everyone's like, oh, this is a 5-star book, but like, is it actually though? Because to me, like, this is not the best Stephen King book out there. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Listen, I'm just a girl with many unpopular opinions, okay? What can I say? Next, I have a 3.5 and it's Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I finally am not living under a rock anymore. I read the book and I watched the movie, baby. So in this book, we are following this guy who becomes obsessed with this other guy named Tyler. And Tyler, long story short, starts this fight club where they all just invite men over and they all have to fight each other. It's a very weird book. I finally understand what people mean when they say that Chuck Palahniuk writes like such weird books that they don't even have a genre. That's exactly what this book is. Very weird, doesn't have a genre. Seems ridiculous in theory. The first half of this book, I was like, wow, this sucks. The second half of this book, I really enjoyed it. That's why I settled with like a 3.5. I think I gave it 4 on Goodreads. And I watched the movie. The movie was really well done as well. This has lots of mixed opinions. Lots of people gave this 5 stars. Lots of people messaged me and told me that this sucks. So like to each their own. I actually enjoyed it. But I can definitely see why this book gets compared to American Psycho, which, you know, is one of my all-time favorite books. Just the slow descent into madness of this main character and his rambling madness. I don't want to give too much away. I can definitely see like very subtle Patrick Bateman vibes going on in this book, and I do recommend it. Next, I had 4 4-star reads. The first one being Goddess of Filth, which is a tiny little novella. I listened to it on audio. It literally took me like an hour and a half or something. Like if you're looking for a short novella, recommend. So this one is about this group of friends and it's a possession horror, but it wasn't like scary or anything. I mean, I don't think so, at least. Like, I didn't really think that this was scary. It was more of like a kind of a feminist book about friendship and becoming a woman and like expressing your sexuality as a woman. I don't want to give too much away because it's such a short read. I think, you know, if you're kind of looking for like a women empowerment, feminist possession book, look no further. It kind of reminds me of Jennifer's Body just a little bit. Like they're very much different, but like very slight vibes going on there. But yeah, this one was a fun one. I enjoyed. And then my next 4-star was For the Sake of Two by Judith Sonnet. Of course, the sequel to For the Sake of, one of my all-time favorite reads of this year. This one is extreme horror. Extreme. Like, I'm talking, this is one of the most disgusting, graphic, gory books I've ever read in my entire life. I actually almost threw up multiple times. Like, I was actually gagging, ready to puke, because even this book even like pushed me over my limit a couple times, and I am really not someone that has a limit, so that's saying something. Now, to me, the first book I gave 5 stars. So I actually prefer the first book to this one, and I know a lot of people say the opposite. A lot of people gave this 5 stars and gave the first one 4 stars. I mean, that's how like all my friends have been rating them, but to me, the first book, in my opinion, was less graphic, and I felt like it focused more on the characters and the empathy that the reader has for the characters, whereas this one follows more of, you know, the villains and the gross, disgusting shit that they are doing to people. And it's basically, I don't want to give too much away, but you're following these people on the dark web that are obsessed with humiliating and doing disgusting, disturbing, violent games with people. Like, they'll kidnap people and make them do disgusting things and be like, oh, well, if you don't do this, I'm gonna kill your loved one right in front of you. And so it's like, how far are you willing to go? Like, what would you do to save your loved ones? That's what this book is exploring and what the series is exploring. This one was just like really nasty and disgusting, and I just didn't feel a connection to it as much as I did the first one. But as far as extreme horror that like literally will make you puke, it's good. It's good extreme horror splatterpunk if that is what you're looking for. But don't read it and then come complain to me that you are traumatized, because people do that and I'm tired of it. My next 4-star is the thriller. It's The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I know a lot of people have been reading this and giving it 5 stars lately. I didn't love it as much as everyone else seems to, but I still really enjoyed it. So we are following this girl, Shay, and is that her name? Shay? Yeah, Shay. So she is in her 30s and she's listening to this podcast, and on the podcast it's this boy that she went to college with. They were friends in college, and he has this true crime podcast where he talks about all the murders happening, and he starts talking about 2 deaths that happened in their hometown, and turns out they were 2 girls that she was roommates and close friends with in college. So it turns out both of them died by suicide, and he doesn't think that it's a suicide. He thinks it was murder. So she's like, oh shit. So she goes to meet back up with him, and the 2 of them go to investigate what actually happened to these 2 girls. It's dark, it's disturbing, it has a lot to do with cults, and it has a lot to do with violence against women. And I know a lot of people said that they could not handle this book because of the violence against women, and I totally understand and I totally get where you're coming from if that's what you think. But it was dark and it went there, but I just couldn't vibe with the writing. Still, like, this is the issue that I had with In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. I just can't get fully into her writing. There is this aspect of the book where it's like a podcast element. So he is interviewing her for his podcast, and she's telling this like story of all the dark shit that happened when they were in college and what kind of led to their death. And as you can see, it goes back and forth between like him and her having this dialogue. And typically I would find that really cool, but I actually found it really annoying because I felt like it was always, every chapter she's like, let me tell you a story. Like, it literally started with like, okay, I need to tell you a story. Let me tell you a story. Okay, I'm gonna tell you this story. Let me tell you a story. And then it's like, I would get so invested in the plot, present day, and then it was like, let me tell you a story. And then it just sucks you back out and you have to listen to her long, boring speeches and stories. And to me, I just feel like it took away like some of the intenseness of the book because it just slowed it down. And the dialogue was really awkward between the 2 of them. That aspect of the book I wasn't a huge fan of, but I mean, it was a pretty good thriller. Like, it was a decently done thriller and I would recommend. But I'm talking like, if you can't handle Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, like, don't read this book. Like, it's pretty disturbing. Next 4-star read. This might even be a 4.5. I really like this one a lot, and it was Suffer the Children by Craig DeLuey. I read this for that creepy kid vlog that I did. This is a horror book where it's kind of like a virus that hits where all the children in the town die. Boom, dead, right? So they're all dead, all the parents are freaking out, and then all of a sudden this bell goes off, which signals that like every single child in the world has like officially died. Right when that bell goes off, the kids start coming back to life, only this time they're a little bit different and they're craving blood. So it explores that whole aspect of how far are you willing to go for your child or for your loved one. And they need more and more and more blood in order to stay alive, because if they don't get enough blood, they will die again. So it's very crazy. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic, crazy horror novel. I think if you're a fan of like Pet Sematary, books with the undead, definitely check this one out. I really enjoyed this one. I flew through it. I think I read it in one day. Like, one day. I just could not put this down. I was listening to the audiobook while I was doing things. I just couldn't put this book down. It was so good. and I highly, highly recommend. Then my favorite books of the month, I had 2 5-star reads. The first one being We Spread by Ian Reid. Now this one, I'm kind of shocked that I loved this book because I was not a huge fan of I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Obsessed with this one, so I don't know. What does that say about me? I'm just weird. So anyways, this book we're following from the perspective of an elderly woman. And I think that's why I loved this book so much. Hear me out. I, of course, have been working in a nursing home for 6-7 years now in occupational therapy. And I don't do that job full-time anymore, but there is a very huge, like, special place in my heart for the elderly, and following from this elderly woman's perspective, where basically she's living alone and, she starts falling and having memory issues, and her husband, her late husband who passed away, basically reserved a spot for her in this assisted living for when she couldn't take care of herself anymore. That's where she would go. So they take her to this assisted living, and as you're reading this book, you're not sure, since you're reading from her perspective, you're not sure what's real, what is like just her memory, her dementia, like you don't know what's like a delusion, what's real. You don't know if something sinister is going on at this assisted living. Like you don't know who you can trust in this book, and it throws you in so many different directions. I love this book so much. I'm not going to pretend like I know all of, like, the hidden meanings and symbolism and everything that goes into this, or even like 100% understand the ending, but I think it was just so well done, and it really explores like human connection, and also, it just puts into perspective like what it feels like to be someone with dementia and how terrifying that must be, to have those issues where like your mind is playing tricks on you and it feels so real and so vivid. And I just think that this explored that topic so beautifully, and as well as, like I said, human connection. It was just so well done. I read this in one day and I was obsessed. And then my other book that I loved was The Push by Ashley Audrain. I read this for my Creepy Kid blog. Absolutely obsessed. This is more like dark literary fiction, I would say. And we're just exploring this woman who has a child that she doesn't feel a connection with. And you're starting to wonder, like, is something sinister going on with this child? Is it postpartum depression? What is going on? And then she has another child that she has a strong connection with, and so many dark, devastating things happen in this book. I think this book like really puts into perspective like every woman's fears as far as like having children, and it was just so beautifully done. So bleak, disturbing, depressing, and heartbreaking, but so beautifully done, and I was just obsessed. I hear a lot of different opinions about this one, that people thought it was boring, that they didn't care. I loved it. This is definitely one of my favorite books of the year, and I highly recommend. And that is it. Those are all the books that I read this month. Let me know what your favorite book that you read this month was, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!